Much, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I think it's important to point out to my colleagues that this bill is requiring instruction on specific elements of our Declaration of Independence, Michigan Constitution, and U.S. Constitution. This amendment would essentially go back and just say you have to teach on the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And that's a little bit of a concern to me because what I've seen coming out of our schools today is an incomplete education on these seminal documents for our, that are important to what it means to be a good citizen in our country. In particular, Declaration of Independence. Did you know that there's 27 unique grievances identified in that Declaration of Independence? Yet most of the folks in this body and probably anywhere else you go out in our state only know of taxation without representation. You know where that fit in the list of grievances? It was middle of the road. The Declaration of Independence is not a thick document, folks. It can fit on one page. Let's read specific elements of that document and make sure our kids are instructed in it. You'll find also that the contents of that Declaration of Independence actually point to items that you wonder, why is that ever in the Constitution? So if you're ever wondering about where did the Third Amendment come from, well, you know what? That's listed as one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence. So I think it's important that we give our students a chance to understand in detail what's in these documents. And you don't get it with a superficial review of the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. It means you actually have to go in and read specific elements of it. And the bill as written is intended to highlight specific misinformation that's been conveyed in course materials that I've identified in classrooms. For example, Second Amendment, there are course materials that actually instruct that the Second Amendment reads that if you're in a state militia, you have the right to bear arms. Well, all of us know that that's not the way the Second Amendment reads. We also know that everybody talks about the United States being a democracy. Well, if you read further into Article 4, Section 4, you understand that we are guaranteed a Republican form of government. And that has nothing to do with political parties. That has to do with the mechanics of how we operate as a nation. And then you also have instruction on the General Welfare Clause, and you forget to go into the fact that Congress has been granted with limited enumerated powers, and those enumerated powers are identified in Article 1, Section 8. So, my friends, the reason I'm so opposed to this amendment and the reason why I'm pushing for this legislation and hoping to earn your support in the first place is that we have a lot of discussions in the news where there's a lot of he said, she said commentary. And you know, is this bill constitutional? Is this executive order constitutional? Well, you know what? I want to equip our citizens with the ability to ask the right questions, to know exactly why something is unconstitutional, to be able to understand that the executive power, the limits of that power are defined in Article 2, Section 2. I want an educated citizenry. And if you look at Article 8, Section 1 of our Michigan Constitution, the very purpose of our government is to provide, or a purpose of our education system is to provide educated citizens and good citizens. This amendment, if adopted, would simply gut those core instructional items here and essentially gut our ability to have educated citizens that, in the words of John Jay, not only know their rights, that would know our rights so that they're better apt to defend them. So I urge a very adamant no vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Senator Knezek.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a number of remarks I had prepared to share as it relates to my amendment, but I'd like to thank the previous speaker for making all of my points for me. What's so dangerous about the bill as it's written, as identified by the previous speaker, is that it only asks and only delineates that we teach our students specific elements of the Declaration of Independence, specific elements of the Constitution, specific elements of the Michigan Constitution. I believe, and I know a number of us do, that in order to understand these very vital and important documents, it's important to understand them in their entirety. And it should not be left up to the Michigan Senate as a body or to any one senator to determine what aspects of the Constitution are more important than the others. If that's the approach that we want to take, Let me point out the aspects of the Constitution that were left out of this bill that apparently are not important enough to be taught to our children. This bill makes no mention to the Fourth Amendment that talks about illegal searches and seizures here in the state of Michigan and the country. And again, in a time where we have seen the Fourth Amendment whittled away to almost nothing in this country, I can't understand why we wouldn't want to drive home the importance of that amendment to our children. This bill makes no mention to the 13th Amendment that talks about the abolition of slavery. This bill makes no mention to the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. Rather, let me correct myself. It takes a 5-section amendment of the 14th Amendment and buries it down to one sentence. And the 15th Amendment that talks about the right of citizens of the U.S. to vote. This makes no mention of that amendment either, nor does it make mention of the 19th Amendment, which I could imagine would be very important to a number of women in this room, as well as the women across the state of Michigan. And so my amendment, quite simply, Mr. President, asks my colleagues on this side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle to support a bill that doesn't pick and choose which parts of the Constitution we want to teach our children. I'm asking with this amendment that we teach our children the entire Declaration of Independence, the entire United States Constitution, and the entire Michigan Constitution. Thank you, and I ask that my remarks be printed in the Journal.
Without objection, your remarks will be printed in the Journal. Senator Colbeck.
Very much, Mr. President. I'd just like to point out, if this amendment were adopted, there's no guarantee you would be instructed in the entire Declaration or the Constitution or any of those items. What this does is allows keyword education to be executed in our classroom, and I want to make sure that we're getting the actual script. And, you know, often when we go off and pass laws in this body, it's due to a correction of ills that we've seen out in society. It's a bad practice that we want to make sure that we discontinue. The items that have been selected here were selected for a very good reason. They were selected because that's where we've had some of the most egregious omissions, if you will, in the classroom on some core foundational principles with our system of government. So it should be pointed out, too, in the text of the bill that these are not limited. The instruction in the Constitution Declaration are not limited to the items enumerated in this bill by any stretch of the imagination. So all the items that the good senator has identified may indeed be taught in the classroom, and I encourage the whole document to be taught. It is not a long document. Even the Constitution fits into my vest pocket here. So encourage it, but like I said, our job typically as legislators correct ills that have been identified out in society, and this bill as written currently does exactly that, and I encourage your rejection of Amendment Number 1.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Senator Knezek.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to respond to the good senator from the 7th District, first, I want everybody to get out their calendars. I want everybody to get out their iPhones, and I want you to write down today's date as the day that a Democrat asked for the teaching of the entire United States Constitution to our children, and a Republican rose up and said that they don't want that to happen. We are picking and choosing what elements of the Constitution are important to teach our children. We're saying that what's included in this bill is included because it is what is most oftenly omitted within the classroom. Yet again, I point to what I personally believe are two very important amendments that are under attack in this country right now. The Fourth Amendment dealing with illegal search and seizure, and the 15th Amendment related to the right to vote in this country. This is such a simple amendment. It takes away all these different sections and says, teach the Declaration of Independence, period. Teach the United States Constitution, period. Teach the Michigan Constitution, period. And I would ask my colleagues to support this amendment, period.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Usually I like discussions with the good senator from the 5th District, but when he's making a spurious assertion that I'm not encouraging the reading of the entire Constitution or Declaration of Independence, that can't stand. So I want to make sure I want everything to be to be read. The problem is current grade level content expectations talk about teaching the Declaration, teaching the Constitution, and it's been cherry-picked in the classrooms. I want to make sure that we understand that these core principles are instructed in the classroom instead. So thank you very much. I urge a no vote again on amendment number 1. And we can go on all day if you want to continue this, but gosh darn it, don't you dare accuse me of going off and not wanting to encourage the reading of the entire Declaration or our Constitution.
Senator Knezek.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the good senator from the 7th District just pointed out, he wants the entire Declaration taught to our children. He wants the entire U.S. Constitution taught to our children. He wants the entire Michigan Constitution taught to our children. And so I look forward to his support of my amendment.